Welcome to New Hope Lutheran Church and Pastor Charlie's Toolbox. So today I have here one of my earlier projects in woodworking. It's a box to hold an oil stone which is used for sharpening tools. So if I want to sharpen a chisel, for example, I take the lid off it and there's a stone here. It just sits nicely in the box. And I get some light oil. That's why it's called an oil stone, because it needs oil. And you put it on there nice and generously, because in time it just soaks right into the stone anyway. And you take your chisel, you hold it at the right angle, and you just move it around the stone, covering all parts of the stone so you don't get a groove in it. And in that way, you touch up your chisel and that's what's called honing a chisel. It's sharp now. Just gives you that little extra bit of an edge. And when I use the word honing, well, usually for a chisel it means sharpen, but it can also mean that something is perfected over a period of time. That's what honing is all about, perfecting something over a long period of time. And that brings me back to this box I built for this stone a lot of years ago. Now, if you're able to look at it closely, you may find it really isn't all that perfect. The inside here is kind of roughly chiseled. That could have been sanded a bit better. And there's a chunk here. It looks like it may have broke out. I had to glue it back in, but it's not quite even. And then when I go to put the top on, if I don't put it on the right way, it's sticking out here and it's not enough there. I have to turn it around, put it on that way for it to fit right. So it's not a really perfect example of woodworking. There are mistakes I made back then that I probably wouldn't make today, because I've had a lot more practice. I've been able to hone my skills in that. Now, something that I've had to admit over time is that even though I have had a lot more practice and might do a better job than I used to, I'm still no super craftsman when it comes to woodworking. The reason is, well, maybe it's not the reason, but woodworking, it just kind of fell into my lap as an occupation because, well, that was just what my family had been doing for a couple of generations, and at the time it seemed kind of logical to follow up on that. What happened to me though was that after doing that woodworking for a lot of years, I came to the conclusion that, well, it was an okay thing to do for a hobby. I really wasn't all that interested in it as a way to make a living. I look back on that time now and I realize that I wasn't really called to be a full-time woodworker. It wasn't what God had in mind for me. And thinking back, I can see there were signs of that all over the place, including a longing I had for something that was just more fulfilling. And we find something similar in our lesson for today from Luke 5, 1 to 11. In that gospel story, Jesus borrows a fishing boat to speak from when the crowd he'd been addressing gets so large that they're actually crowding him into a lake. So he asks the fishermen if he can get in their boat, and they'll just, push off a little from shore so he can stand in the boat and preach to them there. And afterwards, Jesus encourages these professional fishermen to row into deeper water and drop their nets. But at first they're hesitant because, Well, they'd been out working all night and they hadn't caught a thing. It may not have been the first time that happened, and of course for them, no fish, well, that meant no income. But with Jesus' encouragement, they go out and drop their nets, and they wind up catching not one, but two entire boatloads full of fish. And right after that, Jesus invites the fishermen to give up fishing and join him in his work. What might surprise us there is not only do they do that, but they join Jesus right away. I mean, here they had just caught enough fish to pay for several days' salaries, and they just leave it all behind. We might wonder about that. But maybe they also had had enough of their jobs and they were longing for something different, something that was nagging them deep inside, and so they followed Jesus' call to go with that. Being called is often a matter of feeling you are needed somewhere else more than you're needed in your present position. It might be something that's just nagging you in the back of your mind, a need for some kind of change, even if you aren't really sure what it is. Of course, a calling doesn't always mean that we just leave everything and move away elsewhere. We're called to different things, whether it's an occupation we have or a volunteer position. Quite often, a calling involves something you are already interested in and you'd like to explore further. And you know you have reached your current calling when you're content what you are doing, even if it isn't always easy to do, but you like it, and it's okay. Callings can also change in your life. They can go from one thing to another, as God may require your talents and skills for a whole variety of purposes. So, whatever your calling, listen to it and pay attention to it. Take the time to figure out what it might be asking of you. God doesn't want you to be unhappy with your work or your volunteer experience. God asks us to move on to things that we have some real skill in, even if those skills may need to be honed a little bit, and things we are eager to do. So may you hear your calling clearly, and may you follow it faithfully.